Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
It's kind of like the research on how people view stress. And if you view stress as inherently negative and that it's going to impact your health, it will impact your health. If you view aging and stress and these things that happen as just a part of the experience, something that you have the ability to get through, if you're more positive about it, then it doesn't tend to impact your experience or your life so negatively. I don't want to downplay the impact and how shitty it can be, because it can be. But if you let the shittiness consume you, then that's all you'll ever experience. Hey everyone, this is Meredith. You're listening to our show, the Afternoon Snack Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to tell you how to hack your metabolism in 2025. Not really. There's not really a metabolism hack, but we are going to talk about the 4 main metabolic toggles or metabolic scenarios and how to use them to move towards your goals. Which ones are most appropriate for which people, how they get used correctly, how they get used incorrectly, and then where we think most people should focus their time to get the best bang for their buck in the kitchen, in the gym, and to become the happiest version of themselves. So let's get into it. Alex?
Yes.
You asked me no fewer than 6 times this morning one question, and that question was...
No, I only asked 3 times.
Look, I'm embellishing a little
Okay.
for the sake of this story. It was 3 times, and it was, why is this light on? Why is the light on in the downstairs bathroom? Why is the light on in the garage? Why is the light on wherever else I had? What's this cabinet doing open? It was a little annoying.
I know, it got to a point this morning because the last few months, and it's been getting progressively worse, probably because I've just taken over closing and turning everything off. But it got to a point where I'm like, I can't live like this. I can't be following Meredith around you and turning off all the lights. I'm outside, I'm doing the snow, and I see the garage light on. I'm like, what could she be doing in there for so long? And then I walk to the other side of the house and I see into the office window from outside and I see the bathroom light on in the downstairs office. And I'm like, why? Is she putting up the shower curtain? And then I realized no one's in there. And I'm like, I bet you she was too lazy to go upstairs to go to the bathroom. She went to the bathroom in there and didn't turn the light off when she left. Turns out that was the case.
2 things. I was in the garage. I was getting the camera out of the garage and I turned the light on and my hands are full. So I couldn't. So I had the tripod and the camera. So I didn't turn it off. But I also had turned it on and then come outside to help you with the snow and was like, the light on in the garage actually makes this snow by the garage easier to see and therefore deal with. So I was like, this is kind of
You could
handy.
easily see the snow in front of the garage without the garage light on.
Okay. It was just a thought. I was like, this is helpful. And it wasn't the only reason I left it on.
The other hundreds of times you've left the lights on.
We were also going into the garage shortly after to get the ski stuff. So I was like, I'll just leave it on.
Okay, what about the bathroom? What is your excuse or reasoning for the bathroom?
Okay, the bathroom. This house has a few things that just don't make any sense. One of the things that bugs me the most is on a lot of the rooms.
You know what bugs me the most? This.
Okay, just you asked the question, I'm going to answer it. It doesn't make it okay.
No, what I need from you is I forgot. I just don't turn the lights off. And I'll try to do better. I'm sorry,
things
Alex.
That make
You've had to spend your time in your day following me around, turning everything off. You know, it costs money. And it's bad for the environment.
We have efficient light bulbs. Some of the light switches in bathrooms, closets, things like that in this house are on the outside wall. You don't walk into a room and turn the light on.
But you walk out. You're still passing by.
I know, it's just not how my brain works with light switches. I'm sorry.
So next time when you tell me that you do everything around the house,
I don't do. I've never
in terms of
said that.
upkeep, besides cleaning, because you
do
don't do that.
a lot of the mechanical and
when the light bulbs go out and you complain about having to be the one to change them,
I would never complain about that because what I
you
will
have
change
complained
them,
about it.
What I will do is put in smart bulbs that I can control from my phone.
Yeah, you need one more thing to do on your phone.
Yeah, but
that's also
there's when you walk in a room, you can set it so that it's just oh, you're here, light on.
Okay, what about the cabinets?
The cabinets, look, I'm sorry. there was a lot going on this morning. There's probably a correlation between like the amount of multitasking that's going on in my head
Yeah.
and my ability
What about
to
the
close
cans
cabinets.
and empty bottles in the car?
That is, we're going to take them to the bottle depot anyway, so I just leave them in the car. It's like, it's logic.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, we're here.
So this morning I got to a point where I had to ask you, why is the garage light on? And you said, oh, well, we're going to go back in there in an hour. And you were like, but I can go turn it off. And I was like, yeah, please do.
Yeah.
And then same with the bathroom. I was like, why is the bathroom light on? And I just stood there.
You can
Until you left and went to turn it off.
You can turn it off. If you happen to be in a space, look.
I am, but I'm not going to continue to go into the space to turn it off
What
and
I
waste
will
my time.
start doing is every time I see a nasty ass, still fully wet sponge in the bottom of the sink, instead of squeezing it off and putting it on the side.
I'm sorry, I do not do that anymore.
You 100%, because I almost said something the other day, and then I was like, you know what?
You know what?
No.
It's probably wet because I had to clean out your bowl and your empty yogurt container.
And you can still go
to take the recycling out.
Set it to the side.
Right. I actually don't have time for that because I'm so busy following you around, turning all the stuff off behind you.
Well, you will have time for the food poisoning that gives you one day, because sponges are nasty.
Okay.
Especially if you let them ferment in their own nastiness.
Okay.
This is not a podcast about picking each other apart. We're just like having a little friendly band. It's friendly, right? We're having a good time.
Yeah, we'll resume this off.
Yeah, we'll wrap these things up. We're coming to you live from the couch that Alex hates, but we still have. I like this couch, the podcast couch. Can't say that we'd recommend Rove concepts, but this podcast is not brought to you by Rove.
No.
Although if Rove was like, what up? You want to like, I would probably.
It depends on how much money they paid us.
Yeah. And like maybe they can recommend better pieces of furniture that they make.
Yeah.
That, not.
You know what? This couch is working for what we're using it for now.
Yeah. You know what's good?
We didn't buy it for the right purpose initially.
No. And what's good about this couch is it doesn't like eat you. Like it would be hard to do a podcast on a couch that was like,
it keeps you awake.
Super cozy.
Yeah.
It's close to the ground. I can half sit on it with my leg off, and that's fine. It's a great size couch for me.
Yeah. Okay. On to the real topic.
We're going to talk about metabolism and metabolic situations and toggles. And we thought it would be kind of like cool to refresh this topic. I don't know that we've actually ever recorded this particular podcast, but we have done this talk before in person. It's been a while. But as we are in the new year, I think officially, even though we're like definitely in December now, we're recording this, we'll be in the new year. There's a lot of buzz around health and fitness and habits and resolutions and things like that. And big part of the motivational menu, don't want to like poo-poo people that try to make changes in the new year. So we thought we would kind of talk about some science behind what goes on in the body when you do different things with it, put different things in it. Ugh, that sounded not good.
I think with January, there's nothing wrong, not necessarily with having a New Year's resolution, but having that be a time to make change. Because you are feeling refreshed and motivated and you're through the holidays and you're coming up on spring and it's getting lighter because we just had the winter solstice.
And I think there were some years where we didn't really experience the holiday rush and the stress and like all the busyness that comes with this time of year. But we're definitely experiencing that more now, and certainly hearing from people. Everyone's like so busy this time of year. So it's like, it's also, I think, just a convenient, everything refreshes, restarts. There's a slowness to January.
Yeah, you just had a break from work.
There's like a lot of like logical reasons to focus on health and nutrition and fitness in January.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
And so with that, when you say, I'm going to make a change, I want to improve my body composition or improve my performance or my health, the question then becomes how?
Right.
And what? And there's so much chatter that we want to clear it up, because I think there are some misconceptions, specifically around, to lose fat, I have to just be in a calorie deficit. Like, not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's more nuanced. So we want to talk about that.
Right. And through the chatter and all the different diets and programs and things that are out there, there are some kind of core tenets that are true. And even if these programs don't name what they're doing one of these 4 things. So we're going to talk about kind of the 4 metabolic toggles and situations that people use, get themselves into, what works well, what doesn't work well, and what you want to use for kind of like short periods of time only. And how you can use this knowledge in selecting a program or programs and periodically sort of checking yourself and how you're progressing. So if you can visualize this as a quadrant, so like a graph, and on that graph, there's 2 items on the x-axis and there's 2 items on the y-axis. And they all intersect with one another and create sort of 4 blocks in a square. And so kind of like a risk assessment table would set up. And on the, let's say on the x-axis, there's food intake. So there's essentially like less and more. And then on the y-axis, there's activity and movement, and there's less and more. So you can see how this creates 4 different situations when we combine those. So you have eat less, do less. You have eat more, do less. You have eat less, do more. And then you have eat more, do more. And those are our 4 toggles, 4 metabolic scenarios.
And I'm going to preface this with the fact that, yes, there are other factors when changing body composition or improving nutrition or whatever your goals are, like sleep and food quality and like all of these little things that we've talked about before, but we're just talking about kind of the main inputs and outputs
Right.
for today.
And so we can make some assumptions. We'll assume that at a baseline, someone has those things taken care of. So let's assume that people are sleeping well enough. They're eating diverse micronutrients, managing stress. They don't have anything crazy going on with their health. We'll talk about how these scenarios can impact those things. But as a starting point, we'll assume that they're okay. They're in an okay place.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, it's January 1st. We know what the diet and fitness industry is like. So why don't we start by talking about the most common one that people will jump into right away, which is eat less, do more. And this is kind of, I think, your really common January 1st. We're not only going on a diet, but we're also going to start a new gym routine. So we're going to put ourselves in a calorie deficit and we're going to increase our physical activity, whether that's running, biking, swimming, going to classes at the gym, whatever it is. We're going to eat less and we're going to do more.
Yeah, it might be as simple as just getting more steps.
Right.
Like activity is going up.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing wrong with this one. It is, when done correctly, effective at reducing body fat, sometimes effective at supporting a body, like a recomposition for the right type of person who's doing it the right way. It's typically a scenario that we want to not have or go into thinking that we're going to do it indefinitely. So it helps to have a time frame in mind and, you know, give yourself breaks, not only for like a mental break, like time off, but physically you stop being able to output at a high level when your body's like, okay, enough of that. It's just not getting enough. Like you can start to dabble into some REDs, like a relative energy deficiency situation, and that has repercussions. So it's good to give yourself breaks or to work on a timeline here and not go into eat less, do more indefinitely. So I guess let's talk about some of the common approaches with that one and pitfalls with it.
Yeah. So I think if we're talking about food intake to start, reducing that, the first issue that I see with that, or it can become problematic, is if the calorie deficit is too extreme.
Yeah.
So you're looking at over a 500 calorie deficit per day. Or even for some people, the deficit might only be 300 calories, but that's too much for them to manage the hunger or the like lower energy or whatever it may be. So being in a deficit that is too extreme for many reasons.
Yeah.
And then increasing activity, I would say the biggest issue is most people tend to go for cardio-based activity, burning calories. Whereas I think there are other ways to kind of do more or do more focused.
Right.
And then like long-term outcomes that you mentioned, REDs, and not even that long-term. It can even be more than 8 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
If you're in a calorie deficit for a long period of time and you're losing weight, or maybe you're not, and then you're just becoming less compliant, and you're, as we discussed in a couple of podcasts ago, your relationship with food is impacted because now you're going from restriction to like maybe some binging or feeling out of control, which can happen when you're in an extended calorie deficit or one that's too extreme. And then, your sleep starts to get impacted, your motivation gets impacted, your mood, your hormones, all of these things can be impacted when you're not eating enough for the amount of activity you're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good summary. And I'm glad you touched on the restriction side of things, because I think there's a real risk with obviously a calorie deficit that is too large for the person, but also there's a risk that comes with creating that calorie deficit by eliminating entire food groups or types of foods, like no dessert, no treats. I'm not going to eat anything that I like to eat because those things tend to be higher in calorie. Like, doesn't set you up to have a great long-term relationship with your body, with the food that you eat. And it can create just sort of ongoing conflict mentally.
Yeah.
And so being aware of how you're creating that calorie deficit really matters. And then with cardio too, I think it's, a lot of people go for running. When you start any exercise program, but especially running, and you do too much too soon, you really are increasing the risk of injury a great deal. And so there's that to be considerate of as well. And so when you're going into this place, it's, I think, really helpful to understand what the science says. And what the science says is that calorie deficits that are larger than 500 calories per day for most people, if sustained for a long time, do result in negative effects both with body composition. So typically you'll see a loss of muscle mass or the inability to maintain it. Certainly you're not going to be able to build it unless you're very, 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 very novice. And even then, what you're probably building is not necessarily muscle mass. It's probably more, you're building strength from just neuromuscular motor unit recruitment. You're not actually building new muscle tissue, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're just adapting. And then psychologically, we see that prolonged calorie deficits that are greater than 500 calories per day start to increase thoughts of food, rumination about food, obsession with food. You start to lose touch with hunger signals done for a really long time. So it's something to be aware of. Like, crash dieting is not good ever. But even something like, I don't think anyone would define 500 calories a day as a crash diet. Like, that's not what I would say is like a dangerous reduction in intake, but it's not, there's no such thing as a free lunch either. And so let's say a lot of people do want that goal of body recomposition. They do want to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, or at a minimum, like retain what they have. The best way to go about that is to create a calorie deficit that is in the ballpark of like 200 to 300 calories per day. That's not a lot when you think about it. Like, if you think about all the things that you eat in a day, you can create that deficit by removing like one food item. Like, I could create that deficit for myself by not eating my cookie in the morning with my coffee. And then that's 200 calories.
You can also negate that deficit by having a few bites of your kid's food throughout the day. Yeah. Which is often something that occurs.
And this is like, it's a game of averages too. So you don't necessarily have to think of this on a 24-hour clock. Like, you can think of calorie deficits as a weekly endeavor. Like, we don't want to get into yo-yo, right? Like,
yeah, like, oh, I ate more yesterday, so I'll eat less today.
Right. But
that
if one day is
cause issues.
Right. If one day is a, mathematically 180 calorie deficit, and then the next day is 240, and you're kind of doing that kind of oscillation, that's fine.
And that's part of it anyways, because food tracking, even if you're the most accurate person, there's still some inherent inaccuracies.
Yeah, like 10% best case.
Yeah.
And that's like pure behavior.
Best case.
And like most if you're weighing your food, consumer grade scales, like they have a 10% inaccuracy built in.
If you ever weigh anything cooked,
that's going to be different. Yep. Food manufacturers, they have a huge margin of error that they get to operate in. So anything that has a nutrition label has error built into it, sometimes a lot. So you're never going to be spot on perfect, but that's fine because we're just doing averages. And that doesn't even bring to the conversation, activity and the contribution to energy deficits created through movement. And some days are more active, some days are less. It's really quite hard to capture accurately what our energy expenditure and our energy intake is over time, but we can take care of that if we do something for a very long time. Okay, so back to body recomposition. So the research says there is if we're maintaining a deficit of like 200 to 300 calories per day, we're not getting to that inflection point where the body's like, nope, not going to do this muscle thing. We're not going to build that. We're not going to maintain it. Because when you think about it from a biological standpoint, when your calories are low, your body thinks that it is in a calorie scarce situation. And so it's going to preserve. And muscle mass is metabolically very costly because it doesn't contribute meaningfully to your body's stored energy. So when you're in a calorie deficit for too long, your body catabolizes muscle tissue. Number one, it can break that down and turn it into glucose, but also it knows it doesn't have to maintain that. Like, it's not going to cost more to maintain muscle. So it's getting rid of something it doesn't need. So that inflection point is around 400 to 500 calories. There's some individual variation, but that's kind of what the data says. So if we stay 200 to 300 calories deficit per day, and we do strength training, something that is designed for hypertrophy, we can at least maintain muscle mass. And that's in most people. For people who are more untrained, they can actually build muscle mass, and not just build strength, but build muscle mass by following a progressive strength program, not exceeding 200 to 300 calorie deficit per day, and obviously eating enough protein. Like, you have to give your body the building blocks. So that's kind of how you use that metabolic toggle, that situation of eat less, do more, in a really strategic way that's backed by science, but also knowing you're not going to do it forever. Like, I think the longest study that was done that was part of that analysis was 6 months, and that was with some breaks, but 6 months of a very, very moderate calorie deficit with a progressive strength training program. And this is in older women too, who are often thought to be fairly anabolically resistant, but even them, they saw pretty big improvements in strength and muscle mass using this approach. That's how we would use that. And it's still not appropriate for everybody.
What happens to your body composition when you don't use it strategically?
That's a good question. So let's just say someone they have body fat to lose. They also know, because they've heard, like, they need to get stronger. Maybe they understand the value of muscle, but they know they want to train. They're going to do a calorie deficit, but they do a calorie deficit that's too big. Maybe they're doing strength training. Maybe they're not doing the best program, or maybe they're doing cardio. So, like, best case with that person, they're just going to become a smaller version of themselves. So you'll see weight loss, but in that weight loss, there'll be fat loss and then also quite a bit of muscle loss. So you're not seeing a real positive change in body composition. You're just sort of getting smaller. And most people, that's not actually what they want. Like, most people, when they have a goal of weight loss, what they have a goal of is fat loss with either muscle retention or like long-term building muscle, so that they just look a little more athletic. Or
so this
lean.
would be described as leaning out.
Leaning out is it's a way that people describe that goal a lot. But there's a lot that goes into that goal. And it's not just getting smaller. It's not just eating less and doing more cardio or zone 2 fat burning or whatever people think that is required.
You will get smaller, most likely, but you will look the same in terms of leanness.
Right.
Your performance will likely go down. And it is also possible that you will look worse.
Right.
If, we're judging how we look based on body fat and muscle mass and the ratio there. I mean, there's just the metabolic response to losing muscle and not really losing fat, or you also lose fat and you lose muscle. And in some cases, because you're so stressed out, you're physically stressed out, and sometimes mentally, you're not sleeping well, you're going to lose muscle at a faster rate than you lose body fat. So your body composition will get worse, even if the scale says you've lost weight.
Yeah. I mean,
that's like worst case scenario. And that's something that we see. We touched on this a while back when we talk about people trying to get into like bikini body season. Yeah. It's just like that cycle of that deficit over and over and over. And that's just not going to help improve your body composition. It just gets worse and worse year after year after year.
Yeah. Like, let's say someone has that pattern, or they, it's January or it's March and I'm going to get bikini ready. And they do this every year. So it's like, crash diet for a couple of months. Like, if you think about it on a graph, like, they'll lose weight. But if you were to map like weight and muscle mass, like, it's like both are going to go down, body weight and muscle mass. And then after the yo-yo diet is over, body weight is going to come back up, but muscle mass is going to stay down. It's not going to go all the way back up without a great deal of effort. And so then the next year, the same thing rolls around. They try the same thing, crash diet, weight goes down, muscle mass goes down even more, weight goes back up. So over time, muscle mass is going down, 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 down. Body weight is kind of doing, gaining and losing the same 20 or 30 pounds. But the net effect of that is like a loss of muscle mass over the years, which means that in, 3 years, 4 years of following this pattern, you're in a much worse situation, or even further away from where you want to be because of a lack of patience. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge, but essentially just not using this particular tool or situation in the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that summarizes that.
Yeah.
What is the next toggle?
So the next toggle would be eat less, do less. So I mean, there's a lot of reasons why someone might do, like, you could call this the injury toggle. You could call this the I just had surgery toggle, off-season toggle.
Could be busy at work toggle.
Busy at work
I just had a
toggle.
child toggle.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, as much as we don't want to like necessarily be tethering activity and calorie all the time, like calorie intake, they're attached. Like our activity level drives our calorie intake to some extent. So
it also drives our appetite,
right.
which drives our calorie intake.
Yeah, for some people, for
Yeah.
sure. So when activity level goes down, either because it's planned reduction in activity, maybe it's the off season, maybe there is an injury, something's going on that's taking us out of the gym, or we're not getting our daily walk or two, you know, maybe someone's dog died. And so they don't have their dog to walk every day, or they don't want to go walk without their dog. Like there's so many reasons.
Way to be a downer.
Well, sorry, but that's to say, like, there's a lot of reasons that you may not even think of that would create this situation where activity level is down. And in that case, like, if someone can, you know, with mindfulness, reduce their intake, then essentially you're maintaining certainly body weight, potentially muscle mass, but, you know, you're also reducing thermic effect of food. It's just one fewer thing to manage. I just had a baby. I didn't have a baby, but like if you did have a baby, but also you have breastfeeding too. So
Yeah.
let's not use the baby example because like that's a different.
if you're breastfeeding.
If you're breastfeeding.
Yeah.
If you're not breastfeeding and your activity is lower, then yeah, sure. But I think this is just kind of a logical reduction in intake.
Not good for body composition.
No.
But don't fret.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes part of it, part of being injured, part of managing aspects of life. It's okay.
But let's talk about off season for endurance athletes or cyclists. Like endurance athletes, definitely ultra athletes, you're eating so much food in season because you have to. And a lot of times that food is simple. Like you're eating a lot of simple carbohydrates because when you're eating 400, 600 grams of carbohydrates a day, they can't be complex. Like you're having to eat gels, you're having to eat white rice, you're having to eat not even
Timbits.
potatoes.
You have to eat Timbits. You have to eat cookies.
Yeah.
You have to eat nibs
Yes.
and M&Ms
So
and muffins.
a lot of times,
right?
yes,
You have to?
You have to.
Okay. That makes me feel better.
With sour gummy bears.
Yeah.
With endurance athletes, especially, that's not necessarily a good diet. And they've done samples of gut microbiomes. Like we definitely see like athlete gut where the markers aren't great. The inflammatory markers are up partially because training is so high, but also because you're just throwing a lot of food at your system. And like eating is inherently inflammatory, especially eating a lot. It's costly. It costs you more and more energy to break that food down. That's the thermic effect of food. So a lot of times in the off season, we'll see athletes greatly reduce volume and then at the same time reduce intake, but also increase the quality of the food that they're eating. So instead of eating Timbits or a lot of white rice or gels or performance foods, you increase fiber, you increase plants, you increase herbs and spices, and just try to like clean things up a little bit, not in like a clean food kind of way, but just increase the quality, which helps the gut microbiome. It increases the diversity and the density of bacteria and yeast and everything that's in your guts. And that's a good thing. Reduces inflammation, helps the body heal, like all of this. And the more we learn about gut health, the more we know how connected it is, even to like mental health, to serotonin production. So we're eating less, we're eating differently, and that's kind of helping heal the body and prepare us for the next season of training and ramping up not only volume and intensity, but also food intake.
Yeah.
So there's a real power in eating less. It doesn't always have to come from this like punishment place. It doesn't have to come from, oh, well, I hurt my knee, so I have to eat less because I can't walk. Like we have such a negativity bias with eating less and just like generally, but it can be a real tool for health and for performance.
I like, even though we're talking about eating less and more, when I talk about food and calorie intake and whenever I adjust for clients, it's not necessarily like, oh, we need to eat less because you're doing less. It's like, oh, we need to adjust so you're eating appropriately for where you're at right now.
Yeah. I mean, this language is a little simplistic.
Yes,
So you kind of have to. I mean, there is data too, in the longevity space that correlates a calorie deficit with greater lifespan. And so we know that that data exists too. Are people actually in a calorie deficit? Unless they're chronically shrinking, no, they are not. But I think that just means that probably we're eating right at what we need to eat. Also keeping in mind that our ancestors, like people like to talk about blue zones. I was talking about blue zones like years ago. I remember writing an article about it. I like talking about blue zones. There's 5 of them in the world where there's a really high population of people that are over the age of 100. And they share these commonalities in the way that they live and their behavior and how they eat and drink and socialize and exist in communities. And I think that's a really important thing to include in the conversation of not only nutrition and activity, but health span and just how we are looking at humans. The caveat there is in the behaviors, in the things that the people in blue zones do, like exercise isn't one of them. Movement is, certainly, but pursuing athletic goals, no. Trying to build muscle mass above what is sort of like genetically normal for human beings, no. Like these things aren't normal for us. Pursuing body composition goals is not normal for humans. So I think you have to take in consideration what your hobbies are, what sports you like to do, what your goals are, because we can't just take everything from blue zones or everything from the longevity space and apply it to us if we're, the data says trying to be in a calorie deficit extends lifespan, but that doesn't include people with athletic goals. You can't have both. So just keeping in mind, like there are factors in addition to these, and the data coming out of the human ecology sort of space can apply, but doesn't always need to apply, and sometimes needs not to be applied.
Yeah. I was just thinking through some scenarios. And again, it is within these toggles, it can be very personalized, or there's variance within them. So you can't just say this is going to be the outcome. So I think about a very, very elite CrossFitter, like training for the CrossFit Games or semis. I mean, I think about even just us. And I'm like, okay, super, super high volume, super high intensity. So doing a lot on the high end of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Eating a lot of food, just generally eating a lot of protein, fat, carbs. I mean, you're getting nutrients, but you're also getting like a lot of sugar and just those more palatable foods that are a little bit higher, more calorically dense.
Right.
So high calorie, low volume. You could eat less and do less in that scenario and improve body composition.
Right.
Which arguably we did.
Yes.
As a result of us just changing our performance goals and life goals.
Right.
So it really depends on the person, what the outcome is going to be and where you're starting at when you implement these strategies.
Yeah. The thing that I like about CrossFit now compared to CrossFit back in 2016, 2015 is like over time, sports select for bodies. And, you look at people who rock climb, they look like rock climbers. Some of that is because they rock climb, but some of that is because people who have the right structure and build and set of genetic cards will seek out sports that, I
think basketball is like the biggest example, best
Certainly.
example.
Sumo wrestling.
Yeah.
Swimming. So you get different bodies in different sports at a high level because they're kind of like selected by virtue of what the sport demands. CrossFit is so young. It was young in 2015. I mean, you're looking at like less than 10 years of competitive sport. And the way that they were marketing at the time was very, very focused on the body, especially women's bodies. And the athletes at that time were really lean, lanky, very muscular, but not big. Certainly not carrying a lot of body fat.
So think like Sam Briggs.
Right.
Anna Tunnicliffe. Margot.
Right. Yeah.
That was like our generation.
Yeah. And
me.
Alex Parker. And a lot of the bias, I think, at that time was sort of towards endurance performance.
Mm-hmm.
You had a handful of stronger athletes, but I think mostly, especially in the women's field, not quite as strong and a little more enduring. Now, with the direction the sport has gone, it's gotten heavy. Like
the tests are just heavier.
The tests are heavier, yeah. And I think what we're starting to realize is, and not even starting to, I think what's coming into the sport is that low body fat percentage is not really beneficial for performance. Like look at quarterbacks, look at soccer players, like look at a variety of athletes in a variety of sports. It's rare for athletes to have very, very low body fat percentage. And so with CrossFit, especially in the women's field now, you're seeing a bigger athlete, more muscle mass, but also higher body fat percentage. And I think that allows athletes to endure the season better. It reduces the risk of injury. It makes for better recovery. That increases
like
leverage.
Overall more durability
and
resilience.
So I like that we're seeing that in the sport.
Yeah.
And like these women, like these athletes are still retaining a high level of endurance capacity. And part of that is I think we like the sport and the coaches involved, they've gotten better at programming. And we're kind of seeing what the body's actually really capable of doing from an adaptation standpoint. But yeah, certainly when we stopped and when a lot of people stopped training at such a high volume, you just kind of see body fat percent come down, inflammation comes down. So like visibly you can you look a little bit leaner. And it's not because you've like tried to look leaner. It's because you're doing less. You're eating less.
Maybe like less intensity maybe will allow your body to adapt a little bit better to strength training.
Right. Exactly that.
A lot of nuance.
Lots of nuance. Yeah. So there's a lot of scenarios where that toggle kind of comes into play. Let's talk about the third one. So this is the one that I call the athlete toggle. It's not just for athletes, and we'll talk about it, but it's eat more, do more. So you're kind of at the top right quadrant of the toggles. So activity is up, training is up, and food is up as a result to support that. This is like an in-season scenario, or if someone, a lot of people don't have a season, they're just training. So it's when someone's training volume is up and they're trying to get the most out of that. This is where I think a lot of people who jump into the eat less, do more would actually benefit more from being in this situation, if not like first, at least more commonly throughout the year. Because this is where like the best analogy that I can come up with is you have a fireplace, and the goal with building muscle, if you want to burn more wood, you have to make a bigger fireplace. Like you have to make it bigger. And so that's what this does. The strength training, the eating more, it's building a bigger fireplace. You're increasing muscle mass, you're increasing performance. So just at rest, you're burning more calories just by virtue of having more muscle mass on your body.
This explains a little bit as to why men can sometimes lose body fat faster than women. Of course, there are other things at play.
Yeah.
But bigger, more muscle, higher metabolic rate. And because of that, they can eat more, but still be in a calorie deficit. Whereas like if you have let's just say a 120-pound female with low muscle mass, their maintenance calories, let's say, are 1,500 calories. For them to lose body fat, they're now eating 1,200 to 1,300 calories. That is not very much food for anyone. Yeah. It just seems like not very much. Whereas like for a man who's 200 pounds and maybe their maintenance is 2,400 to 2,700 calories, for them to go in a deficit, they go down to 2,500 calories. That's still a lot of food. It's much easier to do.
Yeah.
It's relative, but it still is part of it.
Let's come back to that in a second. Just because I want to talk about the population of people that have the hardest time dieting and losing weight.
Yes, okay.
So we're going to circle back to that.
Sorry, I jumped ahead.
That's okay. It got me thinking about it. So with metabolism, like let's bring that word into the conversation. A lot of people like to talk about metabolism, hacks for boosting it, hacks for adaptation, that kind of thing. Metabolism is pretty well fixed for human beings. And it helps to know how like the scientific community defines metabolism. And the scientific community defines metabolism as a byproduct of lean body mass. It's literally like kcals per kg, lean body mass. And when we control for lean body mass, metabolism is predictable in human beings inside of certain age ranges. So this is Herman Pontzer's work. He's the one who has done a lot of research on hunter-gatherers. He's the one who came up with the constrained energy model of human calorie expenditure consumption. But essentially, there are 4 distinct age ranges where the metabolism changes and is then the same. So throughout most of our adulthood, it's the same. And it doesn't change as we get older. It doesn't fluctuate, doesn't change during pregnancy, doesn't change during menopause. It is the same. And that's because it is a byproduct of lean body mass. And so when you think about that, you accept like, okay, that makes sense, which it does. The only way you can quote unquote increase it, and by increase it, most people mean increase what they burn, is by increasing lean body mass. And so this is the only metabolic currency you have is muscle mass. That's it. When you think about that, and I guess we can go back to sort of diet resistant people or people who have a hard time with it. The more you can build muscle mass, the more wiggle room you have on your intake. So person can increase their daily caloric needs by hundreds of calories by increasing their muscle mass. If a person's goal in life is to just get smaller and shrink, that's fine. You can do that. But you lose like that margin of error, that percent margin of error that you have for calorie intake ends up being such a small number of calories per day that it becomes virtually impossible to do it. Like you just can't.
Yeah. Nothing is worse than getting a very small person wanting to lose weight and calculating calories and having to write that number down and present it to them. As a coach, that doesn't feel good.
No.
It's like, wait, is my calculator broken?
You really just you're like, let's talk about weightlifting.
Yeah. Wait, can we go back real quick? Because I think this is important.
Yeah.
You talked about metabolism being fixed, except for building muscle mass to increase metabolism.
It's really to increase daily.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. But what about women who age? Don't their metabolisms decrease as a result of age?
Calorie burn does.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this is like, that's often the language. Like,
yeah.
Well, if I had the metabolism.
And I said that
when I was 30,
purpose.
You'd be like, well, you do. What tends to happen with aging, and this is men and women, but definitely women, people move less. They don't train as hard. They don't train as often. They eat less protein. So muscle mass goes down. Often intake doesn't change, like calorie intake, eating patterns. And so when muscle mass goes down, daily calorie needs go down, intake remains the same. Now we've created a calorie surplus despite not changing anything, quote unquote, not changing anything. So that person will, over time, gain weight. They'll gain body fat. The perception of that is often, I haven't changed anything. I've just gotten older. Therefore, it must be my metabolism. And the reality is you have to keep working or work even harder the older you get to maintain that muscle mass. Also, having a bit of awareness of like the anabolic resistance that we do experience to some degree as we get older helps because, you know, you may be working really, really hard. You may be maintaining or at least slowing the decline of muscle loss over time. But having the awareness that that does happen also allows you to adjust your intake. That's the aging sort of situation there. But it's still metabolism, which is just a rate. It's just a rate. It is a byproduct of lean mass. It stays the same.
Yeah.
But if you start to manipulate variables in the equation, i.e. the lean mass, the rate is not going to go down. The rate's going to stay the same. But the output, the impact on daily calories, that's going to go down.
Yeah.
Did I explain that sufficiently?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
It just reminds me, I'm thinking back to those 2 posts that you did in Palm Springs a few years back.
Yeah.
You should repost those.
That was when I first dropped the Herman Poncer data on people.
That was
kind
also
of right when it came out.
Yeah. That was also when we started doing videos.
Yeah.
And people lost their shit over the first video. So you really had to go and clarify.
Yeah. I was like,
it is hard for people who, and I want to just put people in a box and say older women, but that's the fact. Like, and for reason, because with hormonal changes, and of course there are hormonal changes in men who age, but with women, it's more aggressive. And so they're battling a lot. You know, sleep is impacted. We've talked about this in terms of like perimenopause and menopause, but it's not something in you that's changing. It's changing as a result of what you are able to do.
Yeah. I mean, women have been done such a disservice, I think, just generally, especially like the generation of women that is going through menopause now. Like, I hope our generation will be more informed. But you're looking at like, you know, training all wrong, not doing strength training through their 20s, 30s, and 40s, not knowing a lot about menopause, being told things from their moms and from their grandmothers that weren't true, not having medical research done, being neglected generally as a population of people by the medical establishment, but also society. So it's hard to hear that information, I think, because it's like, you know, it's just, it can feel like one more thing that is sort of like negating their experience, which is a really hard one sometimes. But at the same time, if we can separate those two, and we can say like, this is the science, this is what we know, and it does apply to all human beings, including menopausal women. And we can also recognize that like, you guys have been through some shit, and like all women have. If we can separate those two and accept that this is the science, then you retain so much.
Yeah, it's not necessarily invalidating, it's empowering.
It can be, yeah.
It's like, oh, I do have control to a degree over my body comp. Yes, I am battling some factors and challenges, but I can still do things and manage it.
Yeah.
Instead of just feeling like, oh, this is just how it is.
Well, it's so much how you look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like mindset generally, but it's kind of like the research on how people view stress. And if you view stress as inherently negative and that it's going to impact your health, it will impact your health.
Same with aging.
Yeah. If you view aging and stress and these things that happen as just a part of the experience, something that you have the ability to get through, if you're more positive about it, then it doesn't tend to impact your experience or your life so negatively. I don't want to like downplay the impact and like how shitty it can be, because it can be. I understand that. But if you let the shittiness consume you, then that's all you'll ever experience.
Yeah.
But that's a bit of a rabbit hole.
So back to the do more, eat more.
Right. So in talking about lean body mass and increasing that, I guess we can go back to like the men and women comparison. Men are bigger. They have more muscle mass. If you look at eating patterns in the Western world, so North American eating patterns, especially the US and Canada, especially the US, look at portion sizes when you go out to restaurants. They don't modify the portion size based on who's sitting in the booth. It's the same. And those portion sizes are not for 150-pound women. That is part of the reason why I think women in the 150 to 160 to 70 pound range have the hardest time losing weight. Sometimes they don't need to lose weight, just that needs to be said. But sometimes they want to, maybe to perform better in running or biking or whatever, just to feel better.
Increase strength to body weight ratios.
Right. Yeah. But a lot of times muscle mass is lower for a lot of different reasons. And you are battling against portion sizes. It's harder to create that deficit because you're looking at, someone in that body who is moderately active during the week. You are kind of right around that 2,000 calorie per day mark. Potentially, even a little bit lower if someone is not very active. So to create a meaningful and effective calorie deficit means really reducing food intake by a amount that's noticeable and very easily negated versus someone who's in a larger body or a man or someone who has higher muscle mass and who is at baseline, like their baseline intake, TDEE, is like 3,000 calories. It's much easier for that person to create the deficit because they're not having to slash a large percentage of their intake. They're not having to worry about condiments when they're out. They're not having to worry about portion sizes as much. They're not having to be as particular with what goes on their plate.
And most women who are in that weight range are already paying attention to their nutrition.
Right.
So it's like what I feel is, well, I feel like I'm already doing it, but nothing's happening. Maybe I just can't. And it is because it's so difficult for those reasons to create an actual calorie deficit. The effort needs to be so much higher when it's already really high. And it's like, you are battling going and eating out at restaurants. Like it is really hard to include a glass of wine because your margins are so small.
But like that's your whole margin, that one glass of wine.
Yeah.
So for this person, especially if they're one of the yo-yo people, it can be really encouraging to shift the goal just a little bit. And it's like great time to come up with a gym goal. Let's eat at least at maintenance or like let's eat in a way that supports some strength training. You can help someone recalibrate who they are a little bit. And it's like your whole thing, your whole reason for being here is not to be smaller. You can also be stronger. And if we can focus on that for a little while by eating more and doing more in the gym, not only are you going to like probably enjoy the hell out of that because it's really fun, but also if down the road you want to refocus on weight loss, it's going to be so much easier because you have a lot more to play with because you've spent time building muscle mass. You've spent time increasing your daily calorie needs because that's what determines that. So you have more wiggle room. You have more to play with instead of just having to work with this like super small margin.
Yeah. Or often your body comp changes as a result of eating at maintenance and focusing on building muscle.
Right.
That you get to a point where most of my clients end up throwing their scales in the garbage.
Yeah. It's like, screw that. That doesn't even work.
Yeah. Like my clothes are fitting great. I've been able to do all of these things in the gym.
Yeah.
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling confident. I have a sustainable diet plan. And diet plan, just diet. I'm eating sustainably. I feel like I have balance. There's mindfulness, but there's no restriction. All of the things are going well. Okay, you're in a really good place. I don't need to reduce the number on the scale anymore, which is the biggest win of them all.
Right.
But yeah, I think it is important to say that the eat more, do more doesn't mean eat as much as you can.
No.
I think there are people who fall into the trap of, you just eat a lot and you feel like you're doing a lot. But then because of the overabundance of calories in our society, you can end up eating so much that you end up gaining a lot of body fat.
Right.
So you don't really, maybe you are gaining muscle if you have the correct strength training stimulus, but you're eating so many calories that your body isn't able to really like utilize those for strength building and recovery and performance and output, that now you're just storing a lot of body fat, which can be good if your goal is to now build as much muscle as possible. And then you maybe go into the do more or do the same amount, eat less.
Right.
And that can be that like fat cut. And funny enough, we don't really do that with clients anymore.
No.
I very rarely oscillate with people from like that muscle building and then into like fat loss.
Yeah, I found most people just can't do it. I mean, we can talk about this, but there's a lack of tolerance for there's no such thing as a clean bulk unless you're taking something.
People hate bulking because it goes against everything that society tells us.
Which is like, you should be okay with gaining a little body fat. There's muscle mass also under
No one
there.
likes gaining body fat. And no, it's hard to do it intentionally.
It is, yeah. And it's actually just really hard to train hard enough to do it and like push the scales in the direction of like a large percentage of muscle mass. I think a lot of people end up gaining like equivalent amounts, which is like fine. It's a reversible situation, but you have to be tolerant with that. And we also just don't work with a lot of bodybuilders.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as far as eating more, doing more, if you think about it this way, like most people believe in very simple terms, they have a maintenance set point for calorie intake. It's like, if I eat this, I won't gain weight, I won't lose weight. It's just what I need to function every day. And that's the best way that we can conceptualize it. In reality, most people have a maintenance range for calories because most people metabolically, and again, like the word metabolism means so many different things. Metabolism is, can also be defined as a set of cellular and physiological processes that run in the background and keep you alive. And that's heartbeat, it's respiration rate, it's sweating, it's moving, it's wanting to move, like it's all these things. And so if you think I have a range, that's maintenance, not a set point. If I eat above my set point and I flex into the upper part of that range, now you're voluntarily moving more. You're more motivated to go to the gym. You're more motivated to work hard in the gym. You upregulate all of these physiological processes and psychological processes that have a lot to do with training output, motivation for training. So now we're like using food to modulate the like psychobiological model of motivation. You're training harder. Are you gaining weight? Not necessarily, but because you're operating that upper limit of your maintenance window, you're above that, you sort of tap into all of these things that have a really positive effect on what you get from yourself every day. And then it's easy to see how if you go on the underside of that, the opposite of that happens. There's less motivation, there's less movement, you don't work as hard in the gym, you preserve energy, like you do the opposite. So if you're kind of in the upper range and then we're building muscle. So now the upper range is just scooting up. And we're always kind of, chasing that, eat as much as I can without gaining a bunch of weight. That is going to yield the best performance just for everybody, whether that person is carrying excess body fat or whether they are not.
Yeah.
So it feels really good to be in that place.
There's also like the eat more consistently.
Yeah, eat more protein.
Yeah.
Eat more.
Within that, there are things like, it's not just eating more, like gorging yourself at dinner.
Right.
And skipping lunch and breakfast. Like that's not going to have a great impact on your energy levels.
Don't go to Mongolian barbecue and eat 2,000 calories at once.
Yeah. There's strategies within that to make it as effective as possible. Mm-hmm. When you say like more motivation, more activity, for me, if I end up in a place where I'm under eating, which can be as a result of my activity going up, which is time consuming to train that much, but also reduces my appetite because I'm training more. And that is a common effect. I notice that I'm less likely to be helpful around the house. So it's, when people say, I want to improve my nutrition to have more energy or to feel better. It's like the little things that make a really big difference in quality of life and relationships. Like when I feel good and I'm like, hey, I'll take the dogs out, or I'm not that lazy, like, can you take the dogs for a pee? Or I don't want to go upstairs and get that for you. Or, it's just that laziness.
I don't want to turn the light off.
Exactly. Right? But it's amazing how much better you feel. And you can just do those little small things around the house because you're better fueled throughout the day.
You don't feel like a bag of dicks.
Right?
Yeah.
Getting up off the couch is hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And you're like, it's because I didn't eat lunch. No
Getting
wonder.
out of bed. Like you snooze your alarm less.
It's those little things that make a huge difference.
Yes. Yeah. Eating more in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're still training a lot.
Yeah.
You can still train a lot. Eat less, do more. And that's where it gets bad, is when you're sometimes I get clients who are doing so much and they're not eating very much. And I'm like, aren't you just so tired?
You just get used to it though. I think people can
do.
get used to feeling that way.
Well, it's the same people who do like shift work. I'm like, but how?
They're like, it's just what I do. And I'm like, don't you just feel bad? They're like, I don't know, maybe.
I feel people who feel fine on 6 hours of sleep. I'm like, you just don't know what it feels to feel good anymore.
You just don't know. Yeah. Let's talk about the last one, which will be the shortest one because it is the least, I would say, least commonly used. And that is the eat more, do less. So like you said,
unfortunately, that is what a lot of people do.
That is, yeah, I shouldn't say it's not what people do.
They don't intentionally do it to improve their body composition.
Right.
Or health or performance.
Yeah.
It's what they're moving away from.
It's the standard Western diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
The urban lifestyle.
It's most of the if you're listening to this podcast, it's not you. Most likely.
Probably.
Maybe
we've all done it.
Yeah, we've all done it.
There's an argument to be made that for recovery, for sure, it can help. If you're breastfeeding, what up? This is you. Yeah. I mean, there's situations where eating more and doing less is really beneficial. Yeah. For most people.
I think it's what most people in society are doing as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the people who are in tune with health and wellness. Although some people will still, as a result of the food environment we live in, and the fact that our society has figured out how to make everything that we do easier, like drive-thrus.
Yeah, it's easier.
Eat more, do less. That's the drive-thru.
Right. You don't have to work to get food anymore. Convenience foods are everywhere.
Portion sizes are ginormous.
Uber Eats.
Yeah.
People will just bring it to your house. Yeah, I mean, that's just been the shift in the Western
It's the
diet.
lifestyle. It's a lot of people's lifestyle.
Yeah. And there's also, we live in a complex and traumatic world. Like because of what food does to our brain, especially delicious and highly palatable food, a lot of people use food as a coping mechanism. And that's unrelated to being purely accessible. It's also an adapted and an effective way to manage hard feelings. And so there's a lot of reasons why people get themselves into eating more than they do. And it is a place that a lot of people are working from. And it is, does it distinctly cause health problems? It can, certainly. I wouldn't say necessarily over fatness is an issue. I think being sedentary is the issue. I think that we've attached way too much to body size from a health standpoint. I think that people can be healthy in a wide range of body sizes. I think it's the lack of activity. Yeah. And it's the lack of movement, of exercise, of strength training, of health, connection and community, friendships, loneliness, all of that matters a lot more than if someone's BMI is above 27 or 30. I think that we've used really broad strokes to make correlations based on body size, and that, sometimes, yeah, for sure, that correlation exists. But I think we just live in a very weight biased society. Yeah. And, it's also, we've done this entire podcast through a weight lens and talking about it. So we work with lots of different bodies in our company. It's complex. We would not work with someone because they want to lose weight and they have that goal distinctly. So it's understandable why someone would have that goal. And it's about supporting that in the healthiest way possible. But also, if someone doesn't have that goal, that's fine. Someone can eat more and do less. And the goal may not be to eat less. It may be to do more. And I think that is an equivalently effective way to get someone healthy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I could do a whole podcast on that. This shit irritates me.
Yeah, maybe we will.
Yeah. We can talk about what it would actually take to make America healthy again. And it's not anything to do with Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
What's funny is the number of people in comment sections who are calling him, instead of calling him JFK or RFK, are mistakenly calling him JFK. They don't know the difference.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those? I think it's Jimmy Kimmel, where he stops people on the street. Not he has a guy who does it
Oh,
because he'd be recognizable. But he stops people on the street and asks them questions and they just lie.
Yeah.
They don't know anything. Or they'll ask a question that's totally bogus. They'll say something like, what do you think of JFK being announced, the like health, whatever it is?
And they're like, oh, and they just go on and
yeah,
on
but they don't
it.
know enough to say that it's not JFK.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
They're not like, you mean RFK?
Yeah. And these are the people who vote, which is the whole problem. But let's not get into politics.
Let's not get into our democracy being dismantled and Liz Cheney being prosecuted.
Yeah, let's
not.
Actually, let's not.
Yeah, I mean, okay, bonus metabolic toggle would be a maintenance toggle.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've already touched on this a few times. It's kind of eating more at your baseline, what you need, not, focusing on, well, do I need to do more or do I need to eat more or do I need to eat less and then do less? Like you don't have to always be targeting some sort of metabolic scenario and situation. I think the long-term goal for most people should be that. It should be maintenance. It should be becoming so in tune with what your needs are, how your activity level affects it, what your training does to it, that you're able to just sort of like adjust and make sure you're meeting those needs. And also develop some feeling or intuition for your biomarkers, such as, I really don't want to get off the couch right now. Or I notice that I'm feeling unhelpful around the house or that I don't want to walk the dogs. That means I'm probably not eating quite enough for what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to add in an extra bowl of oatmeal during my day. That kind of thing.
That's me. Yes, I love that. I love the idea of maintenance. It's what we call good enough with your nutrition. You don't constantly need to be picking it apart, improving it. Like at some point in my mind, that starts taking away from life, quality of life. You build a foundation of nutrition that's good enough. And like, yeah, of course, there's always room for little improvements, but it's balance, it's flexibility, and that's going to shift over time, through the months of the year, whatever it may be. But if you have kind of a good enough, then you can focus on other things. Like it doesn't even need to be performance, but for performance, you can have maintenance with your like intake and still improve your fitness. And that's almost the best time to improve your fitness because you're eating for your activity. And if you can create the right stimulus and you have an intelligent program for whatever you're doing, whether it's improving your power on the bike or improving your lifts or maybe getting competitive in CrossFit, you can now put all of your energy into just having really good sessions, knowing that your nutrition is there to support it.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't mean you don't need a coach. I mean, sometimes a coach can be helpful to say, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
How's training feeling? Or, you might need a couple of days here where you tinker, but for the most part, it's stable. If you're not somebody who has performance goals, it's the same for somebody who wants to become partner at their law firm or focus more on their family. Having that maintenance and just that really solid foundation of nutrition supports every goal.
Yeah. It's like that. I mean, in the food relationship podcast, working towards that more neutral relationship with food allows you to keep the main thing in your life, the main thing.
Yeah.
Like if all you're thinking about all the time is like, was that a good decision or a bad decision? Am I eating more or eating less? Like if that is your predominant thought or like it's taking up a lot of brain space, like you're just not present in anything that you're doing. Doesn't matter if that's training related, family related, job related. Like you want to work towards a place where food is in the background. Like you have a high working knowledge of it. You know what you need, you have a good routine. You're not constantly making food decisions, but it's in the background. It's not in the foreground. It's just a thing that you do and that you live with. And then that gives you more time and energy to focus on the things that are actually really important in your life.
And sometimes it takes a while to get there.
Yeah, there's not.
And that's okay. And sometimes some people never get there, but they get closer. That's progress. And that's great. It's personal and like that may be the end goal, but it's not something that everyone is going to achieve in their life, depending on their history or what they're dealing with in any present moment. It's very complicated, but that is what we aim for with most of our people.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to work on any or all of those toggles in the context of your goals, that's what we do. That's what our company does. That's what our coaches are trained to do. That's what we're trained to do. And we'd love to help you with that in 2025. If you've been listening for a while and you've been on the fence about whether nutrition can benefit you, it can. Like coaching can benefit everybody. And it isn't always numbers focused. It isn't always even nutrition focused, like Alex said. It can be focused on a lot of different things. But almost everyone that sticks around and works with us for a long time improves their relationship with food and improves their performance in whatever it is that they're trying to improve their performance in. And it's really cool. So,
well said. Way to just throw it out there.
I'm sweating. I mean, that's us. That's what we do. So hop on board. We'd love to have you. Thank you for listening to this one. If you found it helpful, it would mean a lot if you liked our podcast. Give us some stars, preferably 5.
A review would be incredible.
Absolutely epic.
It really would. It would mean so much. I know it's a huge pain in the ass. I don't even know how to review a podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you can figure it out. You're smarter than me with technology.
And you know what? Like if you have an aunt or a friend or like a sister-in-law who you think would really like be pissed off if they heard this, send it to them. Share this podcast far and wide because we do our best to get the science out there and to help people live better, healthier lives and improve their relationship with their food, their bodies, their workouts. And, you know, sometimes tough love is the right kind of love. So feel free to send this to someone who might be resistant in hearing it.
Trust me, they're going to listen to us more than they're going to listen to you.
100%. And if you are that person who has been sent this podcast and you've made it to this point, kudos to you.
Yeah.
I often say it is harder to change someone's diet than it is to change their religion. So I hope that this gave you some food for thought, pun intended, and maybe you'll endeavor down some different health paths in 2025. I sure hope that you do. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for 2024.
It was a good one, gotta say. Alrighty, catch you guys on the next one.